I'm kind of on him. Oh, are we all muted?
Yes, we're all muted, waiting for things to start.
Oh, okay. Mute me?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third annual Queering Our Classrooms conference. The conference will start shortly. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Majd Sarah. I am a PhD student at the Teaching, Learning, and Culture Doctor program here at the University of Texas at El Paso. We are very excited to welcome you to our third annual Queering Our Classrooms event. Together, we will explore the theme of intersectionality, identities, and learning for our lives. The event continues our goal established in 2018 of building awareness among university students, K through 12 teachers, and university faculty of the needs and experiences of LGBTQ+ students and colleagues. This year, in the light of the national social unrest provoked by police violence against Black and Brown lives, our theme highlights how the multiple identities of LGBTQ+ persons intersect in ways that impact learning and our lives. We have planned an interactive multimedia virtual experience that brings in renowned guest speakers as well as provides visibility to LGBTQ+ identities, experiences, and lives of those in our community on the US-Mexican border. I hope that together we make this event an important forum for changing the narrative of historical marginalization of LGBTQ folks in our community and educational spaces. This year, the coordinator of Queering Our Classrooms is Yu Liao, a PhD candidate at the Teaching, Learning, and Cultural program. And many thanks to both Teaching, Learning, and Culture doctoral students and faculty who have helped with organizing this event, and also for the finance coordinator listed in this slide. Queering Our Classrooms has many sponsors from within the College of Education, as well as throughout the university. A big thank you to our sponsors who have given and supported this event generously. Special thanks to Julianne Flores and Dominique Huerta. Before we begin our program, we would like to call your attention to two resources during our event. The first is the American Sign Language interpretation is being provided here by the UTEP Center for Accommodations and Support Services. And counseling support is being provided by the UTEP Counseling and Psychological Services Office and can be accessed with the information you see on the bottom of every slide. We begin our event with brief introductions of our guest speakers. I will turn it now to Dr. Char Allman, an associate professor here at UTEP in the Sociocultural Foundations of Education. Char?
Thank you, Majd. I think we're going to make a change now and ask Dr. Cindy Cruz to go next because Lady Shug is having trouble getting onto Zoom. So I think we'll switch things around. Would you be able to? There we go. Okay, thank you. So Dr. Cindy Cruz is an associate professor in the College of Education at the University of Arizona in the department I graduated from. She was a high school English teacher and an HIV counselor for many years. And these experiences really influenced her research and pedagogy with queer and trans youth. Her research with LGBTQ street youth centers the theories, pedagogies, and methodologies of decolonial feminist and US women of color thought. Welcome, Dr. Cruz.
Thank you. I'm honored to be asked to talk at your event, and I'd like to thank Dr. Char Ullman and Catherine Mortimer for inviting me to UTEP. I'm new to the Southwest. I just moved from Santa Cruz to Tucson, where now I am at the University of Arizona. I'll start by saying that I've been out as a teacher and as a student since the 80s. It wasn't easy. I think that the specter of the Briggs Initiative, which was this initiative that happened in the late 70s, they wanted to criminalize gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgender, intersect teachers from teaching in public schools. And I think that's always something that happens in California, and I think throughout the US, where people are a little nervous to be out in the classrooms. I have like a formal paper to read, if you don't mind, And it'll tell you a little bit about me and a little bit about the new work that I'm doing on youth and resistance. So I hope that you enjoy this. I work with homeless, queer, and trans youth in Hollywood, California, and my work is reflexive and ethnographic, and I draw from the humanities, social sciences to analyze and think with the narratives, testimonials, and social texts I'm offered from youth who live on the street. I center US women of color, Latinx, and decolonial feminist theoretical frameworks as lenses for the analysis of youth narratives and their experiences. I was a high school English teacher, yes, for a long time, and an HIV counselor for many years afterwards as a grad student. And this experience really influences my research and thinking about queer and trans youth. Thus, my central concern has been about how the theoretical work of US third world, Latinx, and decolonial feminists interrupt how empirical research often approaches and conceptualizes the experiences and narratives of youth of color and queer youth of color as deficit and inequitable, particularly youth from Black and Latinx communities, in particular migrant communities. Right now, I'm interested in countering these kind of deficit approaches to research as one that's often about fixing pathologized youth. I don't want to fix pathologized youth. I want to rethink them. And so under this rubric, change is often forced upon youth, particularly youth of colors, in scripted bodies. And so the research models I'm trying to enact is about challenging these kinds of models. And to counter such research requires other kinds of methods and other kinds of approaches. And that's what I've been trying to do with my research. It's made a change from since I've met Maria Lugones in upstate New York and worked with her on certain projects. And so I'm trying to delink or divest myself from the research models of radical othering, and that I feel like that requires education in youth researchers to reframe these dialectics of domination and submission between youth and police, youth and doctors, teachers, researchers, and all these other authorities. In my own theorizing, I study youth resistance and infrapolitics, informed by the work of Maria Lugones and US feminists of color practices. Throughout my tenure as a teacher and researcher with LGBTQI students, I always observed students talking back to teachers, the police, social service workers, and all these bodily ways. It was the exaggerated snap in somebody's face or the slow swagger of a student turning their back on an authority figure that caught my attention. Schools and youth centers, even those spaces where their mission was to emphasize the educational and health experiences of LGBTQ students, are often the places where the daily confrontations, evasive actions, and stifled thoughts, and this is from Robin D.G. Kelly, of an infrapolitics is in place. And so right now, I've been playing with this idea of infrapolitics. And so I'll define it using James Scott and Robin D.G. Kelly. Infrapolitics is the place or the space of offstage practices of resistance and the creation of dissident political cultures that manifest itself in your daily conversations, folklore, jobs, songs, and other cultural practices. These are all strategies of resourcefulness and innovation created by subjugated communities like homeless queer youth that help them negotiate the continuous scrutiny and containment by those in power. In my work, I want to be attentive to queer street youth practices of resistance and the tight spaces of youth infrapolitics. Yet I also want to move away from the binary of oppressing / being oppressed, as this relationship is foundational, I think, in deficit and culture of poverty models of change. We hear deficit and cultural poverty of models of change all the time in ed research and ed professional development, in the way teacher ed teaches its new teachers. And so for right now, I'm looking to find all these new methods and approaches and epistemologies that help me move away from these discourses of criminality and poverty that often haunt how youth of color and queer street youth are represented in educational research? Well, so let me start by telling you a little bit about James Scott, where he defines a public transcript, and he calls it a public performance of deference and humility by the powerless. Scott also argues that the powerful uphold this public transcript through the maintenance of the symbols of a hierarchical social order. So I love his book, Domination and the Arts of Resistance. That sounds so funny to say that. But there's this epigraph that I love that says everything you need to know about what he means by infrapolitics. So he wrote, "When the great Lord passes, the wise peasant bows deeply and silently farts." And so these onstage practices of a public transcript maintain the illusion of a particular social order. Let's say, for example, between street youth and the ever-present security guards in social service centers in Los Angeles. These performances of the public sphere reveal very little information, if any, of the tensions and low-intensity wars between street youth and the guards and/or police, or offer any sense of how power is wielded between youth and police and their proxies. Now, if an on-stage performance is actually a public transcript, then Scott has decided to develop this idea of a hidden transcript that is the story that takes place offstage, beyond the direct observation of those in power. For these communities, the hidden transcript is the space of rest and leisure, a place where youth gossip about their bosses and their teachers or caseworkers and away from authorities' watchful eyes. Sylvia Wynter also talks about this kind of hidden transcript in her discussion of the Black arts movement, where she describes an infrapolitics where African-American poets, artists, and musicians in these new socialities could develop new ways of being in the world. So you take control of Black representation, narratives, and ideologies. And so these African-American artists and poets developed new languages. They privileged African-American ways of knowing, and in some cases found new ways to relate to one another that were not co-constitutive of white supremacy. So you were able to develop like a new way of being outside of the eyes of white supremacy. And so I think about the possibilities of like these new kinds of socialities for queer youth. I think about a sociality of resistance. And so I find that there's great potential in thinking about and recognizing these offstage spaces, especially for queer homeless youth. So now infrapolitics can be seen not only as these spaces to exchange valuable information about the inner workings of schools and other institutions, and organizations, and work sites, such as like youth, social service centers, or schools. And so I'm thinking perhaps I can push the idea of a sociality of resistance, not only as a hangout where youth share knowledge and share knowledge with others about technology, access to resources, and places to avoid in the street, but also as a space of great possibilities of learning activity, of pedagogies that help youth to relate to one another outside of the surveillance of authority in ways that isn't based on domination, isn't based in white supremacy, but one where youth can practice non-hierarchical, non-capitalist, or non-imperialist ways of being in the world. So I'm seeking this kind of possibility in my new research on youth surveillance and safety, where young people negotiate technology. I'm looking at technology and smartphone use as a space of bartering, exchange, and access to all these social networks that are so important to survive in the street, even despite the overwhelming police presence online. So let me give you a little bit of my thinking about what this infrapolitics, or I'm calling it resistance research, might look like. To research resistance is to take the stance that queer youth are not victims, but are often witnesses and survivors of great trauma and oppression. In order to recognize their resistance later, I have to first recognize the stories of oppression that students tell me on their own terms. That's so important. So I have an example, and I'm going to read you a field note of an 18-year-old Eastern European queer, undocumented youth that I met in my work in Hollywood. So this 18-year-old queer youth meets an older man online who's an American. And so this friend, well, I'll put quotes around it, this friend sends him a plane ticket to the United States so that they can meet. And so the youth was 16 years old at the time of the story. And let me share my screen. So I have this PowerPoint. I hope it pops up. Please pop up. Let me figure this out.
It did.
Sharing is paused. Please bring your shared window to the front. Hold on a minute. Can you see this? Here we go. Now can you see it?
Yes.
Shake their heads? Yes. Okay, okay. Technology really eludes me, even though that's what I'm looking at. Okay, so here's a field note. This is a story that the youth told me, the 18-year-old youth from an Eastern European country. So I called him Yuri. Hold on, I think I am one above. Yuri would not tell me where he was from. Latvia? I'm not going to tell you where I'm from, he told me, but you are close, very close. So what brought you to the US? I've always loved the internet, and I would use the internet at home to meet men. Sometimes we would meet in a nearby large city, and I would stay at a hotel or wherever he was staying. Sometimes we would meet at a local park, or other times I would meet men at highway rest stops. I wanted to meet and talk with other gay men, and there is no clubs or rap groups or any kind of gay organization. Being openly gay in my country is not an option. You can have a relationship on the internet. I've done it. You can use email or go into chat rooms with your chat name. I used a computer at a local coffee house every weekend to talk with people. I met lots of friends online, and we say hello and schedule meetings on the weekends. It's like a party online. We gossip and joke around and find out who's dating who, where all the hot spots in their cities are, what happened to them in the last weekend. Sometimes friends will send money to you so that you can meet them. That's how I got to the US. I met him on the internet. We chatted for a few weeks, sometimes every day, and exchanged photos. He was an older man, a professional photographer, and one day he asked if he could meet me in person. I laughed at that because I was in this godforsaken country and he was in, quote, large East Coast city. But he said he would fly me out, and of course I didn't believe him. I told but a letter came with a plane ticket, and off I went to meet him. I told my grandmother that I was going for just a little while to look for a job, and with just a little rucksack, I got my passport and left for the US. I was 16 years old. When I got to large East Coast city, I lived with this photographer who said that maybe I could work for him, as photography is my passion. But after a little while, things weren't going to work between us, and I left him with the cash that he had given me. I stayed with new friends for a while, crashing on their couches as I looked for work. Nobody was going to hire me, young and now illegal, as I had already overstayed my visa. I did bar back work at a bar, but I didn't make enough to really live on. And slowly I found myself at the shelters, an LGBTQ shelter and a social service agency in the Lower East Side. I stayed in their temporary housing for a few weeks, but I wanted to leave this large urban city, and I left the house and came out to another large urban city on the bus. How does your undocumented status affect you? The boy said, it makes things a little harder. I'm not a citizen, and I had even won a citizenship lottery. I'd won a spot for citizenship, but I blew it. I didn't qualify. You need at least a high school diploma, and I didn't have that kind of educational equivalent. I also found out that I could qualify for citizenship if I made over $100,000 a year. In this way, immigration services considered a person a productive contributor to society. Yeah, that's what they told me. I guess I'll have to wait until I make my millions. Right now, I'll just stay away from trouble and try not to get deported. I read this field note 100 times at least, trying to figure out what I had heard. There are several ways to hear Yuri's story. First, I have to acknowledge that this is a story of a youth being trafficked, a queer youth lured by a potential job in photography and the plane ticket that was reframed by the subject as the end of a relationship. The youth then leaves the short-lived relationship with cash in hand and soon finds himself homeless in a large East Coast city. But it was the way he framed the story to me that was important. Secondly, I had to recognize that in his telling of his story, the ending of the relationship is mutual. He says, it wasn't going to work out for us, right? The youth leaves the older man on his own terms. His recasting of the events is so significant, so important here, from being a youth caught in the traffic of queer bodies to a novice photographer yearning for a new life in the US. And finally, I have to understand that my reading of the trafficking of a young gay man becomes intimately tied to my recognition of his refusal to be seen as a victim. He will not be seen as either expendable or totally exploitable, and he refuses to reduce himself in all these ways. Yet I also recognize this narrative as one of a world in which youth, particularly undocumented youth, are trafficked. And so when I read this field note, I have to say that there are several narratives in place here where these youth worlds and these trafficking worlds exist simultaneously in multiple relations of power. If I only recognize the youth narrative of trafficking, I make a victim of the subject and emphasize the logic of oppression. My job as a researcher is to recognize that there are several worlds at work here, but maybe I can teach myself to recognize resisting behavior too, to recognize those worlds where youth can see themselves as resistant beings. What is helpful in thinking about these multiple interpretations of a narrative is Maria Lugones's conception of world traveling. World traveling is the willful exercise of the experience of agentive negotiations of outsiders to the mainstream organization of life in the US, where queer and youth and women of color and others from non-dominant communities occupy and move through multiple worlds in their daily existence. Think about how we all speak multiple languages. That is evidence of our moving through multiple worlds. And so Lugones, though, recognizes that much of our world traveling is done unwillingly to often hostile worlds, and that for many people, we could occupy many worlds simultaneously. A key thing about thinking about worlds, the way Lugones does, is that we see the self as multiple, where the self constantly changes in its movements across these multiple worlds as necessitated. When I was a high school teacher, I often thought of these plural worlds for my queer youth of color that I was working with, because they all spoke, all of my students in Los Angeles, they spoke multiple languages, which represented multiple worlds and multiple ways of being in all these worlds. And I used to tell my queer youth, there's a reason for you to be like this queer youth of color. There's a reason for you to be here because you are the connection between the Thai community and the queer community, or the African American community and the queer community, and or all these other configurations of youth. And so I think when I read Yuri's story, I think I have to recognize he's in the world of trafficking, because I'm a teacher and I'm like, what have you just told me? And so I have to think, not only in this world of trafficking, he would be seen as exploitable and powerless and utterly victimized. But Yuri doesn't want to be seen that way. And so he refuses that world. And he instead tells me a story of a reframed world where he is seen as ambitious or entrepreneurial. And so a teacher or a researcher, you have to be prepared to recognize all these worlds that queer youth occupy, with an awareness of more than one world can be narrated in this little piece of information or this story that youth give you. And so we have to see how the youth sees himself in this reframed world as ambitious and entrepreneurial, and how a teacher might see him much differently under similar circumstances, and how the youth sees the researcher or the teacher. And so I want to go back to Maria Lugones when she says, world traveling is about a way of identifying what it is to be them and what it is to be ourselves in their eyes. And I feel like that is a key piece or practice of learning to be with students. And so I've been thinking about that for a long, long time, because I know that queer street youth take all these calculated risks, such as Yuri, where young people may weigh the costs of these kinds of decisions that you have to make about migrating to the US, or even having a boyfriend or girlfriend or a partner, with those costs of potentially being exploited or disconnected from your home networks. So in contrast to the very public moral panics that are prominent in the US around sexuality and gender, where you gotta withhold information about safe sex or any kind of information about your bodies, I think that Yuri here is well aware of the unequal transaction between his 16-year-old undocumented self and this older man who lures him to the US. And I have to know also as a researcher that the politics of disguise and all these guarantees of anonymity, because I never ask young people what their real names are. I never write it down, any of those things. It might be that the story that Yuri gave me is still designed to have multiple meanings that I'm not picking up, that will shield the identities of the people in the story. I don't know who this person is who lived in large East Coast city that lured Yuri. At least I see it as a luring of sending out a plane ticket to a young person. And so I think when I don't ask young people to give me their names or any kind of information where the data will tie them back to their stories, I think it frees them to tell me like these stories. And so I want to think about how youth learn to do that. And I want to say there must be this sociality of young people who are talking about how do you protect yourself? How do you create, how do you protect yourself in all these tight spaces? And how do you learn to develop resistance in all these ways? And so right now, I've been thinking about Lugones. She just passed away in July. I was really heartbroken. She's been a great mentor. But I've been thinking about this. In her Pilgrimages book, she has this relation, and she creates that relation with the arrow, the equal, and the arrow, the two arrows. I tried my best to get it on the slide. And so I want to think about this oppressing, being oppressed, and then the symbol resistance relation, because here is where I think, and for politics, where resistant socialities begin to make sense as maybe a model to think about youth resistance and youth practices. And so I want to look at this concept that Lugones illustrates in her book. And I think you can only see it. You have to visualize it, because without visualization, you can't see oppression, nor can you see how resisting behavior is always present. So maybe there's something wrong with the way we talk about resistance in research discourse or in education discourse when we can't see or perceive how power moves in these instances of oppression. Because queer street youth are vulnerable subjects, like the most vulnerable, and especially if you're undocumented. And as soon as you turn 18, not only are you undocumented, but now you're a deportable adult. And so I want to emphasize the complexity of the multiple, often simultaneous oppression that we find in the stories that young people tell us. To be a teacher is to make their stories central in their classrooms. If you want to be a teacher that affirms LGBTQ stories, then make their stories central in your classroom, where maybe it is about the canon, where you think about, okay, we got all these dead white men and an English literature canon. Where are the stories of queer youth that they could read when I was a teacher, I was like, let them make their own stories, let them make their own films and write their short stories about themselves. And let us make their stories central in the classroom. So let me go back to this relation here. So if I talk about homeless youth as the oppressed, I conceptually reify those youth who suffer under these oppressive logics of race and homophobia and poverty. And when I participate in making this conceptually real as a teacher or as a researcher, then I also participate in a logic of domination. So for me to represent queer youth as oppressed or deficit, because that's what it is, right? While representing another group as the oppressor or the hegemony, really, that becomes problematic because it creates a dichotomy that conceals a much more complex web of power. And that's where we need to recognize the multiple ways that young people might tell us a story and the multiple truths that might come out of that. And so to acknowledge this complexity about the youth stories and about all these different kinds of worlds and the relation here is to recognize like plural lives. It's to recognize the multiplicity or heterogeneity of youth lives. And so, in my experience, I've found that queer street youth, the ones that I work with, narrate their lives and travel through many different worlds in different ways. And so I want to think about like the narratives in these experiences, how queer and trans youth and women of color and all these other people occupy and move through these multiple worlds of sense. And so I have to understand that some of them might be worlds that are home and familiar, and that other worlds animate different parts of how others might see us, whether you want them to or not, and whether youth recognize themselves in these worlds that make you invisible or something less than human, or worlds that are meant to define you as deficit, all within our daily experiences. And so this idea of what it is to be them and what it is to be ourselves in their eyes is so important. So I think that my commitment to looking at youth research, youth resistance, is about thinking about infant politics. And so I want to write my own work about youth lives, always against the grain of power. And that's kind of what I'm working on right now. And I'm also thinking about like how I can teach this to teachers. Like in my teacher ed classes, the first thing teacher ed students read is Lugones. We read playfulness, because I think that the playfulness article is called Playfulness, World Traveling, and Loving Perception. And I think that the Lugones article gives us the really basic ways of thinking about, okay, I'm going to stop my share really quickly. I think that the Lugones piece is really about the really basic relation that we make with someone else that isn't based on domination. And I think that is so important. And I'll stop there. I've talked enough.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Wow, that was fabulous. Do we have any questions that people would like to ask?
Would I find the questions in the chat? Oh, look at all those chats.
We're looking. No, I don't think we have any so far. But
Okay.
Thank you very much, Cindy. That was beautiful. And I just loved hearing about your research, how you're grappling with these narratives, and wow, and using Maria Lugones's work. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Wow.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for hearing out my argument, what I'm trying to do. I've worked with queer youth for so long. I was like one of those crazy teachers that I learned about how social services works. I learned how to do all these other kinds of things. It really was a fantastic experience. I did that for about 9 years. of working with homeless youth, and so many of them were LGBTQ. So it's a particular population of youth that I work with, but I wouldn't have traded that time for the world. And I still am in contact with many of the students that I've worked with. So I'm very happy to continue this work, and it's work that I love.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Cindy. Wow.
Thank
Bravo. So next we are going to host Lady Shug. There we go. Lady Shug is also known as Kai Victor and is a 30-something non-binary, two-spirit, queer, indigenous person of the Diné Navajo Nation. They were born into the Red House and Folded Arms clans and grew up in the Four Corners area of New Mexico. Lady Shug has won numerous awards as a drag artist and works as an activist in the Diné Nation to promote equity for LGBTQ two-spirit people in healthcare, education, and government. She works to prevent suicide in the Diné Nation and among LGBTQ and two-spirit people everywhere. She's going to talk today about her experiences, especially in school, as a two-spirit human. Please take it away. Oh, okay. Let's see. Can someone let Lady Shug back in?
I'm in. I'm here.
Ah, there she is. Great. Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Hi, good evening. Do you just want me to go ahead and start, or?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, first, like I said earlier, thank you so much for having me. My name is Lady Shug. I am a drag artist, performer, activist. I was just recently featured on HBO's We're Here. I am a proud Indigenous. Is my video not on?
It's not. If you could put it on, that would be fabulous.
Is it on now?
Yes. Yes, we see you.
Okay, yay.
Yay.
So I am a proud Indigenous, non-binary performer and activist. I was asked to be a part of this because of my appearance on We're Here. But I also had a small presence of working in the Southwest region of Las Cruces area as far as doing prides and functions out there. So I'm very familiar with the area. I have been in the art form of drag for about 10 plus years. I grew up and was born on the Navajo reservation. I am from the Navajo Nation, which is, I prefer to be called Diné instead of Navajo. I currently reside back on my reservation. A little backstory about myself is I was born, raised here on the reservation as a queer kid, and kind of feeling like I was the only person that was different. And I had to leave my reservation to kind of find other people that looked like me, people that talked like me, people that were a part of queer culture, a part of, just being queer and trans. It wasn't until I left the reservation to a city or a border town where I found the art form and the craft of drag, and I kind of found myself because I felt like I couldn't do that on my own. So I started my career in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I was very blessed and fortunate to have an amazing career. And due to some families that got sick, I relocated back to my territory, and I had the opportunity to go back to Las Vegas, but I decided that I needed to be here and I needed to make a reason and kind of be the voice of so many queer kids that feel like they are the only ones. And my reservation is really huge. So a lot of my peers are very, very far from any kind of big towns or big cities. Our reservation is very isolated. We cover New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. And a lot of people, I'm sure you guys probably heard it in the media, because of this pandemic with COVID-19, we lack infrastructure. And so there's not many resources, or there's not many places for, people like myself to kind of be around people like myself. We kind of have to create those spaces. So I felt that it was my duty to kind of bring drag culture and kind of bring people like myself that are in the entertainment business to the forefront, to the mainstream media, to make sure that young kids like myself and my younger peers would see people that look like them, in magazines, on television, here on webinars just like this, and let people know that there are queer Indigenous people. And I'm just very fortunate to been given the opportunity to have this space and hold this space with you guys. Not many performers, or not many queer Indigenous people are invited to these functions. We're always forgotten about. So I just very thankful. I don't know if Shar wanted to ask me some of those questions that you sent me.
Absolutely. Lady Shug, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your experiences, your experiences in school as you were growing up, and what it was like as a queer two-spirit human being.
Yeah. So for me, I went to a school on the reservation. My graduating class was of 97 kids. I think there was only 3 out gay kids in high school and middle school combined. And I knew that I was different. But we as queer people, as young folks, we never became friends. We were always trying to keep our distance from each other because we didn't want to get more bullying or more teased or ridiculed if we hung out together. So I relied a lot on some of my girlfriends and even just my family, but then even I relied to get through high school of enjoying the land. Something that I'm very thankful that I'm able to do. I was able to live on my ranch and farm and kind of find my own friends through 4-legged animals, through livestock and through my horses and my dogs. Sometimes that's where my companionship came, and that's kind of where it continued for me to get through the hardship of being an out queer person in the reservation schools. I did attend a few boarding schools when I was younger, and that was kind of interesting because a lot of those boarding schools were mostly schools that were based around religion, Christianity or Catholic. So because of the Bible and because of religion, as a queer person, you were put kind of isolated by yourself, and even the staff would tease you, and even some of the teachers would know that you were queer and kind of made you feel different. And I feel like a lot of people, because of colonialism, because of religion that was religion was pushed onto my reservation so hard. And a lot of these boarding schools where kids were forced to go to these schools and forget their languages and forget their traditions, a lot of people don't realize that as an Indigenous person, a queer, a trans person is a very sacred person. And that's how it was. But because of, you know, colonialism and religion, a lot of these older people that were teachers or dorm staff aides or principals, they were the ones that kind of let that happen and kind of separate us to be considered different. And so it was very difficult, you know. Sometimes I was really ashamed that, you know, I was Indigenous and I was queer. I went through a whole stage as a young kid of suicide. And right now as an adult, I think I'm still trying to deal with the traumas of just depression. Because you kind of still see that as an adult, as an older adult. I see that there's no space for people like myself that is Indigenous still to this day. I mean, we still have our gay bars, our clubs, you know, the internet, but there's no space for us, even on our own territory. And so sometimes I feel we're forgotten. So it's kind of like a double whammy for me because, you know, I'm forgotten, one, because I'm Indigenous, and two, I am queer or I'm non-binary. So I kind of feel like I just got a bad deal, a bad hand dealt to me. But yeah, school was it was difficult. Even, you know, I could never confide in any counselors or teachers because it was a very small school. So a lot of the stuff, if you told to a teacher or you kind of confide in somebody, they would exploit that to other staff members and even students. So I never felt like safe in high school. I was kind of happy when it was over because I found myself, and I kind of wish all that stuff that I learned and all that heartache I went through as a young child, even as a young adult, if I had that now and I was in school, I'm pretty sure I would have started some clubs, or I would have had a backbone and a mouth to, you know, call people out and hold space for other people like myself instead of being ashamed of it. But I feel like a lot of my peers and even, you know, my parents and even some of my family members or adults were condoning it. So
Well, thank you. Wow. Lady Shug, we have some questions from folks in the audience for you. One person has asked, could you talk about what it means to be two-spirit?
yeah, so the two-spirit term came from the First Nations tribe and more the East Coast tribes. I'm still not too familiar with the whole terminology of two-spirit. I know I can only explain how I interpret it and how my tribe sees queer, trans, two-spirit people. Like I said, I'm from the Diné tribe, which is the Navajo Nation. For me, my grandma, my great grandma used to tell us that we are all five-finger people, and there are there are five different genders, which is masculine, 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 feminine. You have intersex, feminine, masculine, and feminine, feminine. And the way she kind of explained this to me in Navajo was that us as people, as humans, regardless of your skin color, some of us have more masculinity in us, in our bodies, and some people have more feminine traits in their bodies. And it's how you embrace it and how you that's how Mother Earth made you. That's how the Creator created you. And so that's kind of how I interpret that. I don't know if that kind of helps you. And in my language, we're considered like an umbrella term, like the word queer. For us, or somebody that's gay or trans, is called nakle. So I hope that kind of helps you understand.
That's great. Thank you. We also have another question. Someone has asked, Who were the clergy at the boarding schools that you went to? Were they Diné? Were they white?
Yeah,
That's
well,
the question.
majority of it, especially like if it was like the principals or some of the head departments, majority of them were non-Indigenous. But yeah, majority of, you know, the dorm aides or the teachers were of the same tribe. And because of their religious faith, they kind of forgot that, you know, we were sacred people. But I kind of noticed that, you know, we lack a lot of schools and we lack a lot of hospitals and infrastructure on my territory in general. So we have to outsource and we have to kind of invite other teachers and even doctors. This is a good example. Doctors and teachers are always like the forefront of our schools here. Even our colleges that we have here, which I don't understand my tribal government sometimes because they say, oh, you know, come back and, you know, get a job and, you know, help your people. But then when we come back with an education, there's nowhere for us to go because the tribe hires because you're a friend of the family, or they don't hire you because, you know, you're not non-Indigenous. And so I see a lot of different ethnicities that are the teachers and, you know, the people, the principals and the school board members and even the doctors are usually non-Indigenous, and they come from all over Turtle Island, which is the US. And so I kind of find it odd that, you know, we don't have a lot of Indigenous teachers, and of course we don't have a lot of Indigenous teachings or language in our own schools or infrastructures that here on our reservation.
Thank you. That leads into the next question that we have from folks. What kinds of experiences did you have with your career in drag when you were in Las Vegas and here and in New Mexico? Did you experience discrimination because of your ethnicity or gender expression?
Yeah, so in Las Vegas, I was very fortunate to be kind of molded and had amazing mentors that kind of were the best of the best in the business. And so, but a lot of those people and even like the bars and the community of Las Vegas, they all thought I was a part of the Latin community because, you know, I had long black hair and I had dark, beautiful brown skin. So they assumed that I was a Latin performer. So I was always a part of a cast that was all Latin. I didn't know what I was lip singing, but I made them think I did just because, you know, I wanted the work and I wanted to perform. And so it wasn't until I moved back to my reservation when a relative got sick that I fell in love back with the land. I fell in love with my people. I was so excited to see people that look like me, talk like me, smell like me even. And so that's why I wanted to stay here. As far as like the drag community here, it's getting better, but I feel for me, if I was to be a performer and do what I have to do, I have to travel about 3 to 5 hours to go to Albuquerque or Phoenix or El Paso or Denver. There's no local bars here. And so I decided while living here that I needed to start bringing drag culture to the forefront of my people. And so for us as Diné people, we have a thing called tribal fairs. It's kind of like equal to county fairs, state fairs. And so I decided 4 years ago that I was going to bring drag to the forefront. So I did a pop-up show, an all Indigenous cast of all Indigenous performers, and it went over well. I mean, I had in the audience little kids to our elders in the audience experiencing drag culture because they've never seen that. They might have seen it on TV or the newspaper, but it's very rarely, especially if they're so isolated. So it was a beautiful experience. So for the past 4 years, I was trying to get inside those tribal fairs. Because of those tribal fairs, you know, it's very based around religion. Like I said, religion is a big thing that was pushed on my people, and it's still here, and it's still affecting the queer community as far as how we're looked upon. And so for the past 4 years, I was pushing to get inside the gates of the fairgrounds because I'm like, our show is really good that we need to be included. And it was until this last year, 2019, I was invited to the Western Navajo Nation Fair, which is in Tuba City. And so for the first time in any tribal fairs in the world, we were the first drag show to actually headline and actually be on the main stage and actually be treated like a regular performer. And so that was like, I just cried because I was like, after 4 years of this blood, sweat, and tears, it's happening. I'm making waves. And then HBO We're Here started. But then I tell a lot of people that was a simple fact that not just in my own community, but even in mainstream media, there's nobody that looks like me. There's nobody we're always not included. And that needs to change. And even with my own people, because there's other amazing cisgendered indigenous artists, but we're never invited to the festivals or to the program or to the shows because we're queer. And I want to change that script and even in mainstream media, like there should be drag performers that are out and proud on TV in media. And so that's why I'm so thankful for Shar reaching out to me and, the whole crew for inviting me, because this is making the wave. And I can't thank you guys enough for holding the space for a little indigenous girl like myself. So I guess you could say there was a little discrimination, but I would say I just kind of ran with it and just made it my own. And I'm still continuing to do that today.
Wow, thank you. That's amazing. And I really just want to emphasize how important it was that you talked about your experiences both in Las Vegas and on the Dene Nation. And also, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your work in suicide prevention.
Yeah, so a lot of the hospitals that I go to, because I go to hospitals on my territory, and I see a therapist. I've been seeing a therapist for quite some time, and she always asked me to, start talking to the youth, because I would always feel weird and intimidated to tell my feelings to um, other Jeanette people like myself, because I felt like they didn't understand, or they kind of already had a prejudgment because I had a switch to my walk, or I was very flamboyant. So it was something that they didn't like, or they were used, because of society was telling them, we're different, so we have to be looked upon. So I found an amazing lesbian white therapist that helped me kind of get more involved in trying to help the youth when it was needed. And it's kind of hard because of patient confidentiality. Um, but there are small programs, on the Diné tribe as far as suicide prevention and awareness. But I feel like a lot of it's not geared towards two-spirit, queer, and trans folks. And so I try to be as visible, and as openly honest as far as my struggles and my attempts and my story about suicide publicly, how I could do it, through my social media or sometimes through my shows. I'm also trying to convince my own birth mother, because she's kind of been on this journey with me, to start a P flag here on the Navajo Nation, because there's no P flags or any kind of organizations like that based on an indigenous reservation. And I keep trying to push her, because I'm like, there's other parents that need this, and there's other kids that need this as well. Because it's so weird, because our own people kind of look down on us just because we're different. And I feel like once we change that script, that, suicide would go down tremendously, and even like depression, and even just kids being proud of who they are as an indigenous people. I feel like once we change the script of people stop making judgment and stop relying on religion, I think for my people, it would make a world of a difference. And I just hope that one day that we can have more presence as far as suicide awareness for trans and queer kids on the reservation. Because it's something that's very difficult to open up, to your own people or to your peers about. And then it's also hard to consider that to some of our traditionalists or our elders, because if we tell them that we're, thinking about suicide, we have to go through, our traditional blessings and ceremonies. So that kind of makes you feel like you're doing something wrong or it's not right. And I feel like we need to change that script of that. So if I could get a part of a program or start a program, or hopefully my mom starts PFLAG soon, I just want to continue to be that voice and that role model for my young peers, and not even just my young peers, but even my elders. And because I know a lot of my elders recently have been reaching out to me because they said, oh my gosh, I saw you on We're Here, or I've been seeing you do shows here on the reservation. And after, I think one story, I won't say who their name is or who they are, this person came up to me and said, after I saw you and how proud and how unapologetically you were yourself and somebody that looks like me, after 56 years, I came out to my family. And that just made me feel like this is the reason why things happen for a reason. This is the reason why I'm still here in my territory. This is the reason why I want to continue to make space for people like myself and break these boundaries down. So I hope that answered the question.
Oh, that's beautiful. Absolutely. And Lady Shug, as we think about teaching and learning, I'm wondering if I've heard that there's a real process of teaching and learning within the drag communities. Can you talk about that at all?
Can you kind of explain the question a little more?
Sure, like
maybe-
that that there are folks who do drag often mentor and teach other folks how to do drag. Have you had experiences?
Oh yeah. I have lovely drag daughters and drag sons that are, of course, all people of color. Majority are babies that I take under my wing as Indigenous people. And majority of them don't do drag, they just admire it, but I still consider them my children. So I kind of mentor them and I'm kind of mom to them, and they kind of tell me stuff that maybe they don't want to tell their parents or they're kind of ashamed about. So I'm very fluid and open and honest as far as, even like sexual encounters and experiences and practicing safe sex, and even just mental stuff. Like I just don't want my kids to go through depression, and I want them to be able to talk to me about anything and not feel like they're alone, because I did go through a lot of that feeling of being alone and being so isolated out here on my territory, my reservation, because where I grew up, it took us about an hour to get to a border town. And so there's not much out there but your thoughts and Mother Earth. And so anybody could pretty much be a mentor. You don't necessarily have to be a drag performer. Even you guys like yourself, professors and teachers and activists, and you guys put on whatever you need for your job, and that's your drag. I mean, you guys are giving the word of teaching, people, just like I tell doctors, you guys put that stethoscope on, your lab coat on. That's your drag. You're doing it different. So I don't think you need to be a drag queen to mentor kids. I feel like if it's in your heart and in your passion to help other queer and trans and even just different non-binary people, you can be a mentor too. You can have drag babies too.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much. Let's see. I think we have a few more questions. Lady Shug, one of our questions is, how can people outside the Dene Nation help, especially LGBTQ two-spirit folks?
I I don't know how to answer this. I don't know how directly they are. I could just say, as a non-Indigenous person, I feel that to be helpful for other queer people like myself of the Diné tribe, I feel like holding spaces like this, continuing to include us. You know, we're going through an election year, and I've been watching this quite often, even though it's been interesting. It's been an interesting reality show for this upcoming election year. But I see all these politicians. This is a good example. A lot of people, when they do these speeches, they include every race. You know, when they're trying to get that vote, they include white people, Black people, uh, Hispanic people, Asian people, but they always forget Indigenous people. So I challenge you guys, next time you guys hold an event, or even just, you know, go out tonight of town, or you see an Indigenous kid, to always include them, because we're not always included. We have a small percentage as far as the population, and a lot of people, you know, I've always felt like the government's always try to keep us quiet. And some people, you know, they don't think we exist. They think we're only in Western films, or we still live in teepees, and it's so much more as a modern living Indigenous person. And so I just challenge you guys, if you guys want to be involved, just include us, make space for us, is the biggest thing I would say, to do as a non-Indigenous person.
Wow, thank you so much, Lady Shug. Bravo. And we really appreciate your time and your sharing your wisdom. We really appreciate it. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sarah Jean Johnson, and she's going to take over the next part of the program. Thank you.
Oh, I was going to say bye to everybody real quick, and thank you so much for listening to me. I had an amazing time. I was a little nervous because I knew I was going to be around a lot of educated people, so I kind of got intimidated a little bit. I had to calm myself down, but I just want to extend, if any of you guys want to reach out to me and even just talk on one-on-one, or have any other questions of how to get involved. I do a lot of SHUG challenges, which right now, especially because of COVID-19, we're lacking a lot of resources. And so I do a lot of challenges to make gift baskets as far as, care packages. And right now we're coming up through winter. I always do something for the unsheltered relatives. So if you guys want to get involved in any kind of like SHUG challenges that I do, it's all over my social media. And you guys can either email me, we can talk about pretty much anything. Like I said, I try to be as authentic and honest as much as I can. And so I'm extending that to anybody that's watching, that they want to continue this conversation, because I know we have another amazing speech giver. But thank you so much. I had an amazing time. And if you guys haven't seen it yet, please go watch my episodes on HBO's We're Here. It's a beautiful, beautiful series. And then look out for season 2 of We're Here. So thank you so much. Thank you, Shar, for having me. Thank you, all the people and staff, for putting this together. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bravo. And next, we're moving to Dr. Sarah Jean Johnson.
Hello, and I'm pleased to introduce Professor Elire Sainz. He's an award-winning author and poet who recently retired from a 20-year professorship in creative writing right here at UTEP. Today, he'll speak with us about his young adult novel, Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. I just got my copy in the mail yesterday. I'm excited to begin reading. We congratulate you, Professor, on being awarded the prestigious Lon Tinkle Award for a Lifetime Achievement from the Texas Institute of Letters, and are very honored to have you here with us this afternoon. So welcome, and I turn the floor over to you.
Okay. Can you see me?
We can, and we're ready, and we can hear you. We're ready for you, Ben.
Well, I was thinking today. I'm got the notes for the some revisions for the sequel to Aristotle and Dante, and I was thinking about how this all got started. This whole thing that Aristotle and Dante, which has become something of a phenomenon, which puzzles me in many ways, because when I had been sexually abused as a boy, and I had a real hard time reconciling a lot of things in my life with being gay. The last thing I was young, very young, and I never really liked being touched by men. It was kind of terrifying for me, and I didn't trust men, and with good reason. I always think I make a joke that the only problem with being gay is you have to date men, and mostly women laugh about that, and the guys not so much. But there was a real difficulty with me being intimate with men in any way, and I had to deal with all of those kinds of things. And when I did, and I got to this wonderful place, the Life Healing Center in Santa Fe, and it changed my life really. And when I came back and was dealing with my sexuality, I had to learn about that in many ways. And I decided to write this book about these two young men as kind of maybe a healing for myself, or maybe how it would have been for me if I had come to terms with my sexuality, at that age. It would have been nice for me. But when I wrote it, I thought to myself, okay, this book is about two young boys, Latino, Mexican-American boys, living in El Paso, Texas in 1987. And they come to terms with the fact that they're gay and they fall in love. Who the hell's going to read that book? we were laughing at my agent. If I'd have presented you, if you hadn't known me, I got a writer's conference and I'd have thrown that at you, you'd have said to me, well, not so much. Who's going to read that book? And when the book came, and I almost didn't write it, and I finally finished the book. I got sold to Simon & Schuster. Had a gay editor who really liked the book, and may he rest in peace. He died a couple of days ago, and but he really liked the book. Not that they thought that was going to sell a lot of copies, but they loved my writing. They thought I was a lovely writer and all of that. And it got great reviews, and the book didn't go anywhere. And I would say that part of the trajectory of this book is that it was published on the same day that my mother died. And my mother was the most important person in my life because she taught me how to be a man. It wasn't my father, it was my mother. And she also said to me before she died, "Hijito de mi vida, déjate querer. Let yourself be loved." And she knew me, and I was much better at loving other people than letting them love me. That was a kind of almost also because I didn't like to be touched. If I could touch other people, like give them a hug or put my hand on their arm or their shoulder, that was okay with me because I was in charge. But when someone touched me, I kind of froze, and sometimes I would flinch. And I don't do that anymore. It took a long time for me to get to that comfortable space in my own body. So when I wrote Aristotle and Dante, when it eventually became this, it won all these awards, and then it started selling books, and then it never stopped. People kept buying it, and I started getting these incredible letters from people, young men, older men, and they'd say things like, this book saved my life. And I was under the mistaken impression that, well, for young people today, it's really easy for them to come out. Not so much for my generation, but for them, homosexuality is expected, queerness and LGBTQ community were out as a public discourse, as part of our public discourse. It must be easy for them. And I had this romantic notion of that young people had it kind of easy. Well, I was wrong. because young people would write to me and say, I felt the moment that I realized that I was different, that I was gay, that I was queer, that I was a lesbian, that I was, or wanted to be, or I was born with a, I'm a guy, and I realized I was one that I wanted to be a woman because I was a woman, and they all tell me these stories. They say I was different, and the moment they realize that difference, they feel like they're the only person in the world, and those moments they're so lonely. And many, many, many kids write to me and they say, I hugged your book at night. They always made me cry. And it was this book that got me through my darkest hours. You know, I'm a writer, and I wanted to create literature, and without ever realizing that, yes, but to what purpose? To move people, to make people understand their own humanity and other people's humanity. But writing for young people hits close to the bone. And but the most moving letters that I got and emails were messages from men my age or older. And they always say, all of them had two things in common. They said, I wish I would have had this book when I was a young man. And they also said, reading your book healed the broken boy inside of me. And I always, I save all those and I read them because I think that books connect us all. Everything is connected. We're all connected, all of us. And we find those connections very often through literature. As a young man, I was a huge reader. And I grew up on a farm in southern New Mexico. I was born in my grandmother's house in a small little village outside of Las Cruces. And my grandmother was a midwife. She delivered me. She brought me out of my mother's womb and she handed her to my other grandmother, who was there as well, because my two grandmothers were great friends. And I wasn't born in a hospital. And none of us were born in a hospital. All seven of us, except for my youngest brother, Jose, and my other brother always tells him, the reason that you're so screwed up is that you were born in a hospital. Because I grew up very rural and in a very kind of insular Mexican-American community. I didn't feel connected, but we are connected. And what connected me to the world is I was a huge reader, and it connected me to a bigger world. And I love that. I didn't want to see myself in literature. I wanted to see the world. And so I would read books, and then I discovered, and it was kind of an escape because we were poor and we had an outhouse and we had a well, and they had rigged this kind of pipe to go into the house, into the kitchen. And that was what plastered plumbing in our house. And I grew up very not being connected to the things I watched on the black and white TV in our little home. And I didn't see myself there, but I thought, like, God, that's nice. People had nice things. And I felt ashamed because I didn't have nice things. But on the other hand, I loved living on the farm because I felt free. There was a lot of freedom there. And when I eventually, got educated and left, and I went and saw the world, and I wanted to come back to the border. I was real drawn to that. And I was lucky to come back. I felt lucky to come back when I got a job at UTEP. And I really, because the border feeds my writing. And so when I started writing for young people, my novels are all set in El Paso, and they're about young people in El Paso. And someone once told me, did you know that all of your characters are Mexican American? And made me laugh. Like, what are they, yes, I did know that, which I just think it's funny because they asked me that question because they see my characters as universal characters. But usually universal characters, whatever that means, are gringos, not Mexican Americans. And so, but that book translated somehow so well that it got published in 28 languages, which is amazing. Two young boys from El Paso traveled the world, and the world got to know who we are in some ways. People. We're not seen as, we aren't in some ways seen as people. I remember a supposedly good review of one of my books, in Perfect Light. And it was supposed to be a good review, but a review ended like this. Despite the fact that the setting of the story is El Paso, Juarez, and despite the fact that the characters are all Mexican American, the story is universal, despite the fact. And that really pissed me off, because you're saying that there's a 0 degree of culture, and that 0 degree of culture is whiteness, and only whiteness can stand in for universal characters, which is ridiculous. But that is still a big prejudice that we're still working through. And I am able to, I've been very lucky because I've been able to continue to write continuously the past 30 years. The publishing industry is very hard on people. And when I think about, I was writing finishing this book and rewriting it, and it's very much about community. The second book is much more than the first one. It's about all of these people. You have to be connected to them. And it's about the universe, because we matter more to the universe than we can ever guess. We do matter to the universe, all of us. We're connected to the universe. We are part of the universe. We don't die. Scientists tell you that once energy enters into the world, that energy doesn't die. It changes. It changes, and it is still a part of the universe. So anyone who's ever lived is still living somehow in some other form and is still a part of the universe. You don't have to be a Christian to believe. I don't know if I believe in an afterlife or not. It doesn't matter, because as far as I'm concerned, salvation is to be lived in this world and not the next, whatever that next world is. We have to, I learned in writing for young people that the world conspires to take their hope away. And I don't think that's fair. I write because I want young people to keep their hope. What are we without our hope? In times like these that seem so hopeless. I hate that the world is so cruel. I hate that young people are having to live their lives right now, because it disconnects them. They have to be disconnected if they want to keep living. And I don't like that for them. I don't wish that for them. I don't desire that for them. I want them to change the world. Our world needs changing, and we didn't do a good enough job, obviously. And maybe some of us didn't even try. But I still believe, this is why I write, because I really believe that our voices matter, that every voice matters. And I do say Black lives matter, because they haven't mattered. Because that is also an accusation, is that we never thought their lives mattered. So this business of, all lives matter is a denial of our own racism towards Black people who were brought here in chains. They didn't come here because they wanted to look for a better opportunity. They were brought here to work as cattle. And we should be ashamed. And I believe that one of the reasons I write, and with this book, I'm trying to say is that we have to see each other. We shouldn't have to be saying, a Lady Shook shouldn't have to be saying, look at me, I'm here. What is wrong with us that we don't see her, that we don't see each other? When we say, wow, I don't see color. Oh, give me a break. Don't erase other people's colors. Don't erase other people's cultures. Don't erase other people's difference. And this book particularly, and I write about the AIDS epidemic because it was when it was happening, right, when the story is set. And when Ari and Dante are looking at the whole situation, they realize how much people hate them. And one of the things that went on during the AIDS epidemic is that the gay community was even more hated in some ways because, one, they were diseased and people are afraid of epidemics and they might get it, even though, they didn't understand how you got that disease. And second of all, they were hitting the streets in every major city in the world and they realized how many of us there were. And that scared the hell out of them. And that frightened them and they hated us more. And so Ari and Dante feel hated for reasons they don't really understand because they're still boys. And they live in the space of, Ari says at one point, I have to live in the space between Dante's love and the people who hate us without even knowing our names. And I believe that particularly the LGBTQ community, we live between exile and belonging, and we always will. And we have to speak. In my opinion, it's not an option. We have to speak. People have to know our voices. I'm lucky. I think I've always, in many ways, been accepted. Except for this. When I start talking with discussions with people, all of a sudden they get a little bit nervous because I'll say things to kids in schools. I'll say, what makes straight people so superior? What makes straight people better? When exactly do you decide to be a heterosexual? Why do you consider yourselves more human? Well, they do because that's what we teach them, that heterosexuality is somehow superior. Well, it isn't. Our sexual attractions and who we are in the world and who we love in a kind of very intimate way and I'm drawn to that is just a way of loving. And it's not like there's a better way. There's a, I know a lot of people when I came out that would tell me, well, it doesn't matter, especially older people, they say, we love you despite that. I don't go around telling straight people, I love you despite the fact that you're straight, I'll forgive you for it because, and I'll look past it and I'll embrace you. That's ridiculous. When you put it that way, it does sound a little ridiculous. And I think it's very, and just like racism isn't the black man's or black woman's disease, homophobia is not my disease. That disease belongs to straight people. And they have to see it as such and rid themselves of that. Because why should we have to prove that we're human beings? It's obvious that we are. Let's go past that. And somehow so many people can't get past that. And I don't, I'm an ex-priest. I know the Bible better than most people who can quote it to me. Do not try to get into a battle of the Bible quotes with me. And I just don't understand. There is nothing really in the Bible that is really that says that homosexuality is an evil. There isn't. There really isn't. And Jesus never said anything about that. Sometimes I'm offended. Hey, you didn't mention us. But why then is there this thing in Christianity that's cultural, not religious? It's a bigotry against gay people, but it's not biblical. Not really. It isn't. It's a cultural prejudice, and we've tied it to a biblical tradition, but it's not a biblical tradition, and that makes me angry that I think that we kind of sin against a sacred text because it's just not simply there, but it's a very patriarchal tradition in the West, and also very I'm very threatened by women and by difference, because the patriarchy needs order, and they're the ones that need to create order. When I write a book, I get to be God. I get to create order, and I get to write about young people and their confusions, and how their parents struggle with them. I think some parents do reject their children. A lot of parents don't. They just are lost. They don't know how to help them, and they have to deal with this. And they're mapping out their own universe. We all have to be cartographers. We have to map out a new world, and we have to find our own names and our own place in the world, and write our names there, because the world isn't going to write our names there. The world wants to erase our names there, and we have to write them, and we have to write them in blood. And it's a great privilege. I'm 66 years old, and I would say that one of the greatest gifts of my life is that I'm gay, and I wouldn't want to be straight for all the money in the world, because it taught me how to be a man. It taught me that I could choose the kind of man I want to be. And as I say in the new book, his father gives him one piece of advice. He says, Ari, never do anything to prove to yourself or to anybody else that you're a man, because you are one. We can redefine what masculinity is, but we're not doing it. I can redefine it. A straight man can redefine it. And I always remember that it was my mother who taught me how to be a man. And I'm grateful for the kind of man she taught me to be. I don't know, I could go on forever. I'll take questions.
Thank you, Professor, for such a moving personal testimony. Our audience has a number of comments that are admiration for your work and how you also personally touch them. I think we have time for maybe one question. I think you'll like this question. I think you would like them all, but we only have time for one. The question is, your book definitely had a huge impact on me. I held it and cried while I was wondering if I could find the strength to accept myself. Thank you for writing the book. Do you believe other queer people can benefit from writing as self-discovery, even if it isn't for publication?
I do. I think we have to do anything we have to do to write our names into this world. And it doesn't have to be for publication. It doesn't have to be. I didn't write, actually, when I wrote Aristotle and Dante, I have a comadre, Lynn, and she says, "Oh, Ben, you finally wrote a book for yourself." And I did. I didn't think that book was even going to be published, even though I was a published author. So it's important to write ourselves. I think journals are very important. Journaling is very, very important. And because we write our lives down, and we get to see when we write something down, is this true or not? Just because we wrote it doesn't mean it's true. And ask ourselves. And I think that writing your own story is incredibly important. Incredibly important for all of us. And the world would be a better place if all of us would sit down and write our own stories as we live it.
Beautiful, beautifully said. We are glad you did write the book. I think I can speak for everyone. Thank you for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure. And thank you for all of you for all that you do for our community. Thank you.
Now I'd like to introduce to you our art gallery organizer, Adrian Aragones, who is TLC doctoral student and a lecturer in the Chicano Studies program.
All right, well, hello everyone, and again, welcome to today's amazing event. My name is Adrian Aragones, and along with my friends and colleagues, Karima Smith and Jen Mansour, we created a cozy and intimate gallery show for you. However, please know that the credit for this gallery actually goes to the artists who shared their talent, time, and effort that's materialized on a canvas through a lens at the end of pens and pencils and the videos to share their story, intimate conversations, or to help someone visually voice and experience. All the work relates to today's event, which is connected to intersectionality, identity, and learning for our lives. But please know, no prompts were given or preconditions set. People were just told what the event was and they were allowed to run with it. So on that quick note, we could take a quick run through the gallery, I believe. There we go. And what we have here is several artists have contributed their works, and we'll just take a quick walkthrough so you can get a general, a quick peek, if you will, at some of the work that's been done. But I encourage you to come back and revisit and peruse it at your leisure. And we have different works, some under certain artists. There's some really nice collaborations that are happening as well. Just a little mix. It was really great to be able to put the call to art out there and have people respond. I just wish we had more time to put more things together. But again, this is something that is ongoing and will be ongoing, and we'll invite you to keep tabs with us as this is an ongoing event and endeavor. Let's see if we can play that video.
I am what I am. I am my own special creation. So come take a look. Give me the hook or the ovation.
It's my world that I want to have a little pride in. My world, and it's not a place I have to hide in.
Life's not worth a damn till you can say
I am what I am.
I am what I am, and what I am needs no excuses.
And I deal my own deck, sometimes the ace, sometimes the deuces. It's one life and there's no return and no deposit. One life, so it's time to open up your closet.
Life's not worth a damn till you can shout out.
I am what I am.
I am what I am, and what I am needs no excuses.
And I'll deal my own deck, sometimes the ace, sometimes the deuces. It's one life and there's no turn and no deposit. One life, so it's time to open up
so it ended a little abruptly. But again, these are different artists that came together. Some worked in a collaboration. It was up to them. And the information that you see with regards to individual pieces, that is information that respective artists shared. And if it seems like some information is missing, again, we didn't put any particular parameters on them. They shared as much or as little as they wanted. So again, I encourage you to come back. We will have the link available for you to peruse at your convenience. And so again, thank you for coming and thank you for partaking in at the quick peek of our art gallery. And so now I'd like to hand it over to my friend and colleague, Maria Perez, who will share a little bit about the other excellent component to the larger event, which is the podcast component as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Perez. Thank you for having me. It is my pleasure to present the video that team members have presented for this event. Thank you for staying with us. Mm. We, yes.
It looks like the video is not going to play.
Yes. I have the video. If you let me to share my screen, maybe.
Yes. Go right ahead.
Okay, let me see.
Maria,
Yes.
we're
Did you-
unable to hear it. Yeah, I'm going to take the screen back and we'll try to share it a
Okay.
different way. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks for your patience, everyone.
The College of Education and students of the PhD program Teaching, Learning, and Culture welcome you to this portion of the event, Queering Our Classrooms. It consists of two components. The first is 3 podcasts about intersectionality, identities, and learning for our lives. These podcasts are designed for listeners to reflect on the experiences of those who identify themselves as part of the LGBTQ community. The second portion is a list of questions that, together with our friends and colleagues, were prepared to facilitate dialogue. These dialogues can help us identify what we have in common with people who like and respect different cultures and identities. Thank you for tuning in, and we invite you to listen the voice of our family members, friends, and members of the broader community in which we can find intersectionality, identities, and knowledge of life.
Tell me about who you are.
So I'm an elementary music teacher. I'm originally from the central part of Texas. I'm not from the west side of Texas. I have my bachelor's in vocal performance and my master's in choral conducting. I've been married 6 months, which is very cool. We have 2 dogs. Sometimes they're very cool. Something very like specific about all of this background that we're going to be talking about is that I am very Catholic, but I'm also very spiritually aware. So I think that influences a lot of my answers. And so I just think that that's like kind of important to know. But that's me.
Tell me about your background or origin.
Okay, well, my background or origin, I was born and raised here in the El Paso, Ciudad Juarez area. I was actually born in Juarez. I lived in Juarez for about 5 years and then moved over here with my family to El Paso. And I've lived here ever since. I went to school here, I went to college here, and now I work here. I actually majored in biological sciences with a minor in chemistry, and I ended up being a teacher. I actually fell in love with teaching, so.
En base a estas vivencias, estas experiencias, ¿se llegaron a sentir culpables por ser gays?
Yo en lo personal, sí. Sí, yo decía, ¿por qué esto? ¿Por qué no otra cosa? ¿Por qué me tocó esto? Más por como te digo, la situación en la que, como siempre se me notó, en mi familia eran comentarios muy, muy crueles.
Pero estar en situaciones en las que estás con compañeros de la escuela, en las que estás con amigos y empiezan con comentarios despectivos, y pues eso te oprime totalmente, porque en lugar de darte la apertura a decir, ¿saben qué? Oigas, yo me identifico como gay, pero cuando estás en un círculo de compañeros, de amigos, en los que escuchas la forma en la que se expresan, pues obviamente eso te hace callarte, te oprimirte, te oprimen.
Yes.
Pennsylvania looking to break outside, and he gets the first.
Okay. Okay, in the next slides, you can find and listen the 3 complete podcast, and this is the link you can find in the website. And our next guest is Miss Jules. Welcome, Miss Jules, and welcome to the Querying Our Classes 2020.
Yes, thank you. So just one other event that I wanted to share with you all, we do have a Quench series. It's going to be happening next week. So you are invited to join us. The topic is going to be on pronouns matter. You can RSVP online on campusedge.utep.edu. So you are welcome whether you identify with the LGBT plus community or if you identify as an ally, you are welcome. Hopefully we will see you there. And it's going to be next Wednesday, October 14th from 2 to 3 p.m. Thank you.
All right, I think this is it for this event. I would like to extend a big thank you to each and everyone who have organized and participated in tonight's event. We hope that this event continues to embrace the needs and experiences of LGBTQ plus students and colleagues. Stay well, and we can't wait to see you all again next year for our 4th annual conference. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Fabulous work, everybody. Thank you so much.
Yay!
Bravo, that was wonderful, everyone.
Clapping, clapping, clapping.
Good job. Good job.